You know, ladies and gentlemen, the 1977-78 NHL playoffs was a weird mix. The Montreal Canadiens were expected to face Boston in the final, but he had to go to Toronto to do it because Toronto got past the Oilers in the quarterfinal, one of the biggest upsets in NHL playoff history. And when Montreal played Boston, Boston was well served by 2 wins at home, but Montreal ruled the roots the rest of the way. Now, this was kind of a weird campaign because 12 of the 18 teams in the league made the playoffs because of the new playoff format. Now, we're going to talk about the postseason for Montreal and give you an indication of what they faced off against. Now, this was, of course, the Bob Orr's kind of last gasp. He sat up for the season. He returned the next year, only playing in 6 games for retiring. Now, Montreal had waited for the preliminary round victory. Now, rumor has it they're going to play Atlanta first round, but they got knocked off by Detroit. Toronto knocked off LA. Philadelphia knocked off Colorado, and Buffalo knocked off the Rangers in 3 games. Now, in the quarterfinal round, they took on the Detroit Red Wings, and Detroit was a tough squad that year. They won 4-2 in Game 2 in a very, very interesting contest. Now, they won the first game 6-2. Now, Dale McCourt ended up being the big factor for Detroit. He scored 2 in the contests. Errol Thompson as well, coming over for the Rangers, and former Montreal Canadiens Nick Libett scored at 19:22 in the third period to wrap up the scoring. Now, back in Detroit for Game 3, Libett was hot again. He opened the scoring and scored in the second period to put Detroit up 2-1 after 2. But Jacques Lemaire, Pierre Larouche, right over from Pittsburgh, and Yvon Cormier did it. Now, they decided to take out Jim Rutherford in the place of Ron Lowe for Game 3. But I think Montreal woke up by the time Game 4 came along. It was an 8-0 shit kicking. Dougie Risebrough, Gainey, Lafleur, Lemaire, Mondeau, Shutt, Lafleur, and Shutt again scored for the victors. They led 3-0 after the first period with 2 shorthanded goals. And Game 5, of course, wasn't anything but Montreal, although Vaclav Nemensky, my favorite Czech at the time, scored at 9:40 of the first period to tie it. Guy LaFleur-led the power play made it 2-1. And Polonich tied it in the second, but Jarvis with 2-1 on the power play. Pretty good for a defensive player. Dougie and Jarvis again made it 4-2. Ron Lowe started again. Like they tried Rutherford in Game 4, and he was just blown out. Now, the series Montreal against Toronto was probably one of the most unique of the era because the Islanders were expected to be ready to take over the best team in the league from Montreal, but a lot of people said the Islanders didn't show up in that 7-game series. Of course, Lanny McDonald scoring in overtime. Now, in the opening contest, it was 5-3 Montreal. Serge Savard scored at 23 seconds. Only have Ronnie Ellis scored 2:25. But from then on, it was Cornway and Lemaire. Turnbull scored in the second to make it 3-2. But Cornway and Lafleur scored with Pat Boutet wrapping up the scoring at 14:32. Ironically, Dryden only saw 12 shots to save in the contest on 15. Now, Game 2 back in Montreal. Larry Robinson and Guy LaFleur staked the victors to a 2-0 lead. Turnbull with his 6 at 5:47. Then LaFleur scored at 15:33 in the power play, 32 in the power play to make it 3-1. And Don Maloney did score at 8:35 in the power play, but it was all Montreal in this contest. Now, in Game 3 back in Maple Leaf Gardens, a lot of people felt this was kind of a home game for Montreal. Mike Palmetier couldn't stand his head. It was 6-1. Stevie Shutt, Chartrand, Lambert, Lafleur, Lemaire, Lafleur again. He's 7th in the postseason at 5:08, with Georgie Ferguson scoring at 18:50 to make it a reasonable count. Now, in Game 4, Jacques Lemaire at 7:21, another game-winning goal for the big guy, with Steve Shutt scoring at 2:15 in the second to round up the scoring. Now, in the Stanley Cup Finals, Montreal was well served in Game 1. They showed up. Although Brad Park opened the scoring at 2:31, Lafleur, Lambert, Shutt, and Cormier wrapped up the scoring, and Boston had no offense in this contest. with only 16 shots where Dryden saved 15. Now, game 2, a lot of people felt Boston had a good chance to win. They were Brad Park with an early goal again at 3:57, but Steve Shutt followed in the 7-minute mark in the second period. Gainey with his second at 12:12, but Rick Smith, of all people, the former WHA Summit Series player, the former SEAL, made it 2-2. And of course, Guy LaFleur scored one of the biggest goals of his career, past Jerry Cheevers in overtime, to make it 3-2. Now, game 3, we knew Boston was going to show up, but we never thought Gary Doak would have the game winner. He scored at 59 seconds, followed by Rick Milton at 5:11 of the first, with Peter McNabb and Terry O'Reilly making it 4-0, and Montreal only had 16 shots in the contest. Now, game 4 was an interesting tilt. Montreal trailed early on a goal by the great Greg Shepard, but Risebrown Robinson scored at 3:26 in the first, and Robinson 7 minutes in the second to make it 2-1. But Peter McNabb, he's 8, followed by Brad Park, and LaFleur put in overtime in 1927. But of course, one of the biggest overtime counters in Boston history was Bobby Schmutz in the extra frame at 6:22. Now, Dryden only faced 24 shots, with Cheevers facing 30. Now, back in Montreal, a lot of people felt Boston had a good opportunity to win, but he didn't show up in the first 2 periods as they gave up a 4-0 lead. Robinson and Mondeau scored in the first, with LaRouche on the power play again, and Jacques Lemaire. Donnie Marcotte scored at 11:22 of the third period. Now, the fourth game was very bizarre, ladies and gentlemen. Brad Park again, an early goal, scored in the power play at 4:05. Shot tied at 7:01, but of all people, Mario Tremblay, who never scored a goal until the first period of game 6, scored at 19:20, 13:37 in the second to make it 3-1, and Réjean Houle, his line mate, to 7:46. In the second, there was no scoring in the third period. Boston had no offense. They only had 16 shots, of which Dryden saved 15. So you're wondering yourself, like the 78 Stanley Cup championship for Montreal seemed to be a weird configuration because they were getting a little bit older. Gainey was getting more of a stylized play, him and Jarvis. I think at the time Chartrand was playing on the big line because Jimmy Roberts, wasn't the same effectiveness. But this is the 78 team, and there's a lot of Hall of Famers here. You got Guy LaFleur, Jacques Lemaire, Steve Shutt, the Big Bird, Larry Robinson, Réjean Houle, Conway, Mondeau, Pierre LaRouche, Guy Lapointe, Serge Savard, Dougie Risebrough, Yvon Lambert, Doug Jarvis, Bobby Gainey, Bill Nyrop, Mario Tremblay, Rick Chartrand, Pierre Bouchard, Pete Mahavlich, Gilles Lupien, who had 46 games, Michel Larocque, Brian England, a year early ago, Ken Dryden, Murray Wilson, Pat Hughes, which he got from the draft, Mike Polich, one of the first Americans to play with the Montreal Canadiens, and of course Rod Shutt. So Dryden and Larocque shared the duties. Dryden probably his best season of his career, 37-7-7 at 205 goals against average, and Michel Larocque 22-3-4. Now they won 59 games in the regular season, 59-10-11. The previous year they were 60-8-12. So 119 wins in a regular season and 12 in the postseason. So over 2 seasons, you won 133 games. Like I said, well on their way to basically of that what they call the LaFleur dynasty. The dynasty of the 60s was the Belleville dynasty. The mini dynasty of the 70s was the both Mahavliches, and Cornway dynasty, but a LaFleur dynasty that from 76 to 79 because you had Mahavlich. But don't forget Mahavlich was traded this year as well, so we're sad to see him go. So ladies and gentlemen, if you like what we're doing here, we're a Montreal Canadiens Tribute Podcast. Let us know when to like, comment, subscribe, or share.